A Tale of Witchcraft by Chris Colfer. Illustrated by Brendan Dorman. Prologue. A Righteous Return. It began in the dead of night, while the world was asleep. As soon as all the street lamps faded, and the lanterns dimmed throughout the southern kingdom, hundreds of men across the country, 333 to be exact, suddenly emerged from their homes at precisely the same moment. The peculiar activity hadn't been planned or rehearsed. The men never discussed it with one another, or even knew the identities of their fellow participants. They were from different villages, different families, and different backgrounds, but the men were secretly united by one malevolent cause. And tonight, after a long hiatus, the cause had finally called them into action. Each man stepped into the night wearing a pristine silver robe that practically glowed in the moonlight. Matching silver masks with two slits were draped over their heads to shoot everything but their eyes. And the face of a ferocious white wolf was proudly displayed across each of their chests. The ominous uniforms made the men seem more ghost-like than human, and in many ways, they were ghosts. After all, it had been centuries since the Righteous Brotherhood's last appearance. The men left their homes and journeyed into the darkness, all heading for the same location. They traveled entirely on foot and walked so softly their footsteps didn't make a single sound. When their towns and villages were far behind them, and they were certain they hadn't been followed, the men lit torches to illuminate the road ahead. But they weren't on the paved roads for long. Their destination was far beyond any beaten path, and it wasn't on any surviving maps. The Brotherhood hiked over grassy hills, stomped through muddy fields, and splashed across shallow streams as they trekked through the uncharted territory. They had never been to their destination or seen it with their own eyes, but the directions were so ingrained in them that every tree and boulder they passed felt as familiar as a memory. Some men traveled greater distances than others. Some moved faster or more slowly, but at 2 hours past midnight, the first of the 333 travelers started to arrive, and the sight was exactly as they had expected. At the southernmost point of the southern kingdom, at the base of a rocky mountain bordering the South Sea, were the ancient ruins of a long-forgotten fortress. From afar, the fortress looked like the carcass of an enormous creature that had washed ashore. It had jagged stone walls that were horribly cracked and chipped. 5 crumbling towers stretched into the sky like fingers of a skeletal hand, and sharp rocks hung over the drawbridge like teeth in a giant mouth. The fortress hadn't been occupied by a single soul in over 600 years. Even the seagulls avoided it as they hovered in the night breeze. But regardless of its eerie appearance, the fortress was sacred to the Righteous Brotherhood. It was the birthplace of their clan, a temple of their beliefs, and it had served as their headquarters during the days when they imposed the righteous philosophy upon the kingdom. There had come a time when the Brotherhood was so effective at enforcing the righteous philosophy that such a base of operation was no longer needed. So the Brotherhood boarded up their beloved fortress, hung up their uniform, and retreated from sight. Over time, their existence became nearly a rumor. The rumor became a myth, and the myth was nearly forgotten. For centuries, generation after generation of the Brotherhood sat quietly on the sidelines and relished the profound ways their ancestors had shaped the Southern Kingdom, and by extension, the rest of the world. But the world was changing, and the Brotherhood's time of silence was over. Earlier that day, a series of silver flags with the images of white wolves were placed throughout the towns and villages in the Southern Kingdom. The flags were subtle and hardly noticed by most citizens. But to these 333 men, the flags conveyed an unmistakable message. It was time for the Righteous Brotherhood to return. And so, later that night, once their wives and children were asleep, the men quietly retrieved their uniforms from their hiding places, wrapped the silver robes around their bodies, draped the silver masks over their faces, and promptly left their home for the fortress in the south. The first arrivals took position on the drawbridge and guarded the entrance. As the other clansmen trickled in, they lined up one by one and recited an ancient passphrase before entering. Nothing can flee the 333. Once they were permitted inside, the Brotherhood gathered in a vast courtyard at the heart of the fortress. The men stood in complete silence as they waited for the rest of the clan to arrive. They watched one another with extreme curiosity. None of them had ever seen a fellow clansman before. The men wondered if they recognized any of the eyes peering through the mask surrounding them, but they didn't dare ask. The first rule of the Righteous Brotherhood was to never disclose your identity, especially not to one another. As they saw it, the key to a successful secret society was keeping everyone a secret. At 5 hours past midnight, all 333 members were finally present. A silver flag bearing the image of a white wolf was hoisted above the tallest tower to mark the Brotherhood's official return. Once the flag was raised, the High Commander of the clan reviewed himself by placing a crown of sharp metal spikes on his head. The men bowed to their superior as he climbed to the top of the stone platform, where all 332 pairs of eyes could see him. "Welcome, brothers," the High Commander said with open arms. "'Tis a glorious sight to see you all gathered here tonight. Such a meeting has not been held in over 600 years, and our forefathers would be triumphant to know that the Brotherhood has survived the test of time. For generations, the principles and responsibilities of this brotherhood have been passed down from father to eldest son in 333 of the Southern Kingdom's finest families. And on our fathers' deathbeds, we each swore an oath to devote our entire existence, this life, and whatever lies beyond it, to protecting and upholding our righteous philosophy." The High Commander gestured a hand to the Brotherhood, and they passionately recited the righteous philosophy in perfect unison. "Mankind was meant to rule, and man to rule mankind." "Indeed," the High Commander said, "our philosophy is not just an opinion, it is the natural order. Mankind is the strongest and wisest species to ever grace this planet. We are meant to dominate, and our dominance is the key to survival itself. Without men like us, civilization would collapse and the world would return to the chaos of primitive times. For thousands of years, this brotherhood has battled the dark and unnatural forces that threaten the natural order, and our ancestors have worked tirelessly to ensure mankind's rightful supremacy. They destabilized the communities of trolls, goblins, elves, dwarfs, and ogres so that the talking creatures could never organize an attack against us. They deprive women of education and opportunity to prevent the weaker sex from rising to power. And most important of all, our ancestors were the first to wage war against the blasphemy of magic and send its wicked practitioners into oblivion. The clansmen raised their torches high above their heads and cheered for their ancestors' heroic deeds. 6 centuries ago, this brotherhood accomplished its greatest feat yet, the High Commander continued. Our ancestors carried out a meticulous plan to put King Champion the First on the throne of the Southern Kingdom. And then they surrounded the young king with an advisory council of high justices, who were under the Brotherhood's control. Soon the righteous philosophy became the foundation of the mightiest kingdom on earth. The talking creatures were ostracized and stripped of rights. Women were legally banned from reading books, and magic became a criminal offense punishable by death. For 600 magnificent years, mankind ruled without opposition. With the righteous philosophy safely secured, our brotherhood slowly faded into the shadows and enjoyed a prolonged period of rest. But nothing lasts forever. The Brotherhood has been reassembled tonight because a new threat has emerged that was unimaginable until now, and we must eliminate it immediately. The High Commander snapped his fingers, and two clansmen hurried out of the courtyard. They returned a moment later carrying a large painting and set it on the stone platform beside their superior. The painting was a portrait of a young woman with bright blue eyes and light brown hair. She wore sparkling clothes and white flowers adorned in her long braid. Although she had a kind smile that could warm the coldest of hearts, something about the young woman made the Brotherhood uneasy. "But it's just a girl," said the man in the back. "What's threatening about that?" "That's not just any girl," said the man in the front. It's her, isn't it? The one that people are calling the fairy godmother. Make no mistake, my brothers, this young woman is dangerous, the High Commander warned. Underneath the flower and the cheerful grin lies the greatest threat the Righteous Brotherhood has ever encountered. As we speak, this monster, this girl, is destroying everything our ancestors created. A nervous murmuring swept through the courtyard, prompting another man to step forward and address the anxious clan. I've learned a great deal about this fairy godmother, he announced. Her real name is Bristol Evergreen, and she's a criminal from Chariot Hills. Last year, she was arrested for female literacy and conjuring magic. She should have been executed for her crimes, but Bristol Evergreen was spared because of her father, Justice Evergreen. The justice used his connections to lessen her punishment, and instead of death, she was sentenced to hard labor at the Bootstrap Correctional Facility for troubled young women. But Bristol Evergreen was only there for a couple of weeks before she escaped. She fled into the southeast in-between and joined a devilish coven of fairies. She's lived there ever since, developing her sinful abilities with other heathens like her. I'd say her abilities are more than developed now, the High Commander chimed in. Recently, Bristol Evergreen bewitched King Champion the 14th into amending the laws of the Southern Kingdom. The in-between was divided into territories so the talking creatures and the fairies would have proper homes. Women were granted permission to read and seek higher education. But worst of all, Bristol Evergreen orchestrated the worldwide legalization of magic. Virtually overnight, every trace of the righteous philosophy was stripped from the Southern Kingdom's constitution. But Bristol Evergreen's reign of terror doesn't end there, my brothers. She has since opened an atrocious school of magic in the fairy territory and invited all members of the magical community to move there and develop their own unnatural abilities. When she's not teaching, Bristol Evergreen travels across the kingdom with a crew of colorful degenerates known as the Fairy Council. They've captured the world's attention and affection, claiming to help and heal those in need. But our brotherhood will not be fooled. The magical community's objective is the same today as it was 600 years ago: to brainwash the world with sorcery and enslave the human race. The brotherhood roared so loudly the ancient fortress shook. High Commander, I fear we are too late, said a man in the crowd. Since the Fairy Council appeared, the public has grown fond of magic. I overheard people discussing the surprising benefits the legalization has caused. Apparently, illnesses and diseases are on the decline thanks to the new potions and elixirs that are sold in apothecaries. They say agriculture is thriving thanks to the spells protecting crops from frost and insects. And people are even crediting our growing economy to the popularity of enchanted products. Every man wants a self-driving carriage, every woman wants a self-sweeping broom, and every child wants a self-swinging swing set. Public opinion is starting to shift about the other amendment too, said another man in the crowd. In fact, most of the Southern Kingdom actually likes the changes King Champion had made to the Constitution. They say allowing women to read and pursue education has elevated discussions in our school, causing students of all genders to think outside the box. They say splitting the in-between into territories have made the talking creatures more civilized, and now travel and trade between the kingdoms is much safer than before. All in all, the people believe the legalization of magic has sparked a new age of prosperity, and they wonder why it didn't happen sooner. Their prosperity is a facade, the High Commander shouted. A hydrangea may be beautiful, its scent may be pleasurable, but still poisonous when ingested. If we don't restore the righteous philosophy, our world will begin to rot from the inside out. Too much diplomacy will make us weak. Too much equality will kill initiative. And too much magic will make us lazy and incompetent. The magical community will dominate us, the natural order will crumble, and absolute pandemonium will ensue. But how do we restore the righteous philosophy? A clansman asked. King Champion is under Bristol Evergreen's influence, and we need the king to amend the law. Not necessarily, the High Commander scoffed. We need a king, not the king. From the new creases in his mask, the Brotherhood could tell that their superior was smiling. And now for the good news, the High Commander said. King Champion the 14th is 88 years old, and it won't be long until a new king sits on the throne of the Southern Kingdom. And as fate would have it, the next king is very sympathetic to our cause. He respects the natural order and believes in the righteous philosophy. And like us, he has not been fooled by the fairy council's displays of compassion. The next king has agreed to abolish King Champion's amendments on one condition: that we appoint him as the new leader of our brotherhood and serve him as the righteous king. The clansmen couldn't contain their excitement. Until now, they could never have imagined a world in which the sovereign of the righteous brotherhood and the sovereign of the southern kingdom would be one and the same. If they proceeded wisely, such an outcome could solidify the righteous philosophy for generations to come. What about the magical community? A clansman asked. They are more powerful and popular than ever before. Surely they'll revolt against the new king or bewitch him just as easily as the old king. Then we must terminate them before the next king takes the throne, the High Commander said. But how? The clansman asked. The same way our brotherhood nearly obliterated the magical community 600 years ago. And believe me, brothers, our ancestors were armed with much more than a philosophy. The High Commander climbed down from the stone platform and then hoisted the platform up like a gigantic hatch. To the Brotherhood's surprise, what he exposed was a massive arsenal of cannons, swords, crossbows, spears, and chains. There were enough weapons to mobilize an army of 1,000 men, but these weapons were unlike any the clansmen had ever seen. Instead of being made from iron or steel, all the blades, arrowheads, chains, and cannonballs were made from a red stone that glowed and flickered as if fire were trapped inside. The crimson light flooded the colorless courtyard and mesmerized the clansmen. "It is time for our righteous brotherhood to come out of the shadows," the High Commander declared. "We must honor the oath we made to our fathers, and strike before our enemies have a chance to prepare. Together with our new righteous king, we will preserve the natural order, restore our righteous philosophy, and exterminate the magical community once and for all." The High Commander removed a loaded crossbow from the arsenal and fired 3 arrows at the portrait of Bristol Evergreen, one into her head and 2 into her heart. "And just like any colony of pests, we must kill its queen."